I'm Dwayne Brown. Tonight on KPBS Evening Edition, picket lines go up at Kaiser Permanente facilities across the state. We'll tell you why mental health workers are on strike tonight.
I'm Amitha Sharma. The men who attacked a French magazine office reportedly claimed to be avenging an insult to the Prophet Muhammad. But what's the underlying objective of attacks like this? And a San Diego councilman wants to reform the referendum process, but there are lots of legal questions about the idea. We'll look at how reform might happen.
And parochial schools are struggling in San Diego and across the nation. We'll look at what the local Catholic diocese is doing about it. KPBS Evening Edition starts right now. Hi, good evening. Thanks for joining us. Mental health workers are striking at Kaiser Permanente facilities throughout California this week. More than 75 of them picketed today in front of Kaiser's hospital here in San Diego. Their union and Kaiser have been trying to hammer out their first contract for 4 years. Workers say they're fed up with staffing shortages, forcing patients to wait too long between appointments. One told KPBS patients have to wait up to 2 months for a follow-up appointment at the Kaiser Clinic in Point Loma, a claim Kaiser officials deny.
It's just heartbreaking, and it's infuriating. I get really angry. When they look at me and they say, "You've got to be kidding me. I have to wait until when to get in next?" I'm like, I know, I hate telling you this.
I think this is primarily about union posturing and trying to get a better contract. We are focused on the care of our members, and we are negotiating in good faith.
Union officials say more than 75% of Kaiser clinicians won't come to work this week. Kaiser says members with mental health emergencies will be treated, but patients with regular counseling appointments will need to reschedule. The man in charge of the state's Public Utility Commission has been on the job for less than a month, but Michael Picker is already raising eyebrows because of the way he handles his email. KPBS reporter Eric Anderson joins us to talk about the latest. Eric, why is email or electronic communication such an issue for utility regulators?
Well, CPUC emails have grabbed a lot of public attention recently, especially those coming from the desk of recent President Michael Peavy. He's under fire for his cozy relationship with utilities that he regulated while at the CPUC. Consumer advocates are also trying to find out if the new president, Michael Picker, has that same issue. But attorney Maria Severson was surprised to find out last week that Picker actually deletes his work emails if they're older than 90 days.
Yes, I think that the governor should support an immediate call for a forensic investigation into why Picker only has emails for 90 days and to recapture those emails that he says he's deleted.
But it looks like that forensic investigation can be avoided. I contacted the CPUC today to ask about the email question. They said that Picker does delete emails from his business account to keep his work email box from overflowing, but spokeswoman Terry Prosper says the emails remain on CPUC servers and IT officials can access them all the way back to 2010.
So, Eric, why is this such a big issue for Severson?
Well, she and attorney Micah Geary have been trying to collect all CPUC documents that are linked to the shutdown of the San Onofre nuclear power plant. They're particularly interested in anything that involves an investigation designed to determine who was responsible. Severson and Geary have argued publicly that the panel quashed a probe into the shutdown and then approved a multi-billion-dollar deal that puts the majority of the cost of the shutdown on the shoulders of ratepayers. And they also asked about correspondence linked to a specific meeting that they were shut out of last summer. That was a meeting that Picker was attending as a member of the commission.
Of course, we've got more about the controversy online at kpbs.org. Reporter Eric Anderson. FBI is investigating the hijacking of social media accounts belonging to U.S. Central Command. Now, hackers took over CENTCOM's Twitter and YouTube accounts to post threats against U.S. forces and messages supporting Islamic State militants. Officials say the hackers didn't get into any sensitive systems. French police say as many as 6 members of a terrorist cell may still be at large tonight after last week's deadly attacks in Paris. One was spotted driving a car registered to the widow of one of the slain gunmen. Turkish officials say his widow is now in Syria. Her husband and 2 other men claiming ties to extremists killed 17 people in Paris last week. Amita Sharma is in for Peggy Pico tonight with more on what it means to be radicalized.
World leaders marched with millions of French people yesterday to show solidarity in the wake of last week's terrorist attacks in Paris. Intelligence officials continue to piece together whether the 3 gunmen acted in isolation or on behalf of Al-Qaeda, ISIS, or some other terror group. The attacks renew questions about the challenges nations face in identifying terrorist threats and preventing them. UC San Diego economics professor Ellie Berman, author of Radical, Religious, and Violent, The New Economics of Terrorism, is here, along with Deepak Gupta, San Diego State's distinguished political science professor. Professor Berman, one of law enforcement's biggest fears is people going abroad to receive terrorist training and returning to attack the homeland. Given the attacks last week in Paris, can the West expect more such attacks?
Oh, absolutely. Absent much more aggressive security response, much better monitoring of ex-jihadists, then yes, this is going to happen and it's going to happen again. I mean, I think what's worth stressing here is there's been a pattern. There was Toulouse, there was the Jewish Museum in Brussels, there was the attack on the Canadian Parliament, there was the Boston Marathon bombing. What's common to all of these is homegrown terrorists who went and trained somewhere, as far as we can tell, and came back with a skill level that allowed them to do things that were really quite audacious. The Boston Marathon bombing attack and the Charlie Hebdo attack are cases in which a well-defended target was nevertheless successfully attacked. This means that our law enforcement, our counterterrorism, really has to up their game, especially in Europe.
Professor Gupta, this fall, FBI Director James Comey was in San Diego, and he talked about the danger of would-be attackers acting alone. Here's what he said.
Thanks to the proliferation of material on the internet, someone no longer needs to be directed by Al-Qaeda or one of its progeny, but instead can be self-directed, inspired, and trained in a way that's very, very difficult for us to see.
So, Professor Gupta, given that state of affairs, how does law enforcement even begin to identify the threat?
It is very difficult indeed, because these self-radicalized people, which in the terrorism parlance are called the lone wolves. And lone wolves, they are motivated by their own inner callings. And suddenly they get military training from the internet, little bit of training, or they actually go over to Syria, Iraq, Pakistan, Afghanistan. They come back radicalized and then suddenly decide to attack. Now, those are very difficult targets to approach from the FBI's perspective. Little bit easier are those who are like 3, 4, or 5 people when they form what they are called the Fedayeen group. That means they are like the Mumbai attackers or the Canadian Parliament attackers, when they go out and they know that they may be killed, and sometimes they are actually killed. And those are but since they are the people, they are talking to each other, they're a little bit easier to detect.
Professor Berman, we keep on hearing that from intelligence officials that Al-Qaeda has shrunk, but simultaneously we have ISIS now and the proliferation of other terrorist groups. Is there a political solution in addition to a military one?
In our in our conflict with Al-Qaeda or with ISIS?
With ISIS and other groups.
Yeah, I mean, hotspot by hotspot, in the long run, of course, there's a political solution. In Syria, in Lebanon, eventually in Somalia, in Yemen, Pakistan, Afghanistan. Each of these things could be solved in isolation, but in the meantime, and this could be generational, there's going to be a threat to people that live in the West. And we're going to have to be able to defend against it, which means we're going to have to be able to keep track of individuals that rotate through those hotspots and get themselves trained.
Professor Gupta, following the Parisian attacks, Islamic leaders all over the world came out in full force to condemn them. What's the purpose of this condemnation?
The purpose of the condemnation is to show a unity of purpose, a united front against political extremism by these Islamist groups. It included people from all over the world, including the Islamic world. Mahmoud Abbas was there. And all of these, the presence of all of these people, tell the extremists that we don't approve of what you're doing, and it's not popular.
Professor Berman, journalist Ron Suskind spoke with me recently, and he said the purpose of attacks on the West is to narrow our civil liberties. Here's more of what he said.
They want us to show the world that they're brittle, that they're matters of convenience, that when we feel fear, they'll vanish. That's the idea. It's to instill terror and to show ultimately that the United States and the West is not true to its oaths. That's key. It's a dynamic we're in now, a hearts and minds struggle.
Very quickly, is there a way for the West to combat terror without trampling on our civil liberties?
Well, there's a balance, but I don't think the tension is what is the tension that people think it is. In the following sense, civil liberties are valuable to us. They're much more valuable to us than any of this in any case. But it's also true that to the extent that a community feels isolated, and there are over 5 million Muslims in France, right? To an extent that a community feels isolated, then it might not want to cooperate with the authorities when it identifies a youth at risk. In the long run, what you really want to do is make it very, very hard for recruiters to identify kids that think it's their calling to go off and fight in Syria in the name of some cause. What you want is for the principal to report that person so they can go have a chat with him and maybe disabuse them of that notion that they could be a hero in Syria and then perhaps come home and become a threat in France.
And we've got to wrap it there. Professor Berman, Professor Gupta, thanks so much for coming on the program.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
A Chaldean priest in El Cajon is still under orders to return to Iraq, even though Pope Francis says he can stay here. Father Noel Gorgas was ordered back to his home country by the Patriarch of the Chaldean Church in Iraq. Now, the church reveres the Pope, but the Patriarch is still the leader. He says Gorgas and several other priests will be excommunicated if they don't return, and says survival of the church in Iraq is at stake. Gorgas says his own survival is at stake and says returning to Iraq would be suicide because of the Islamic State militants in that country. Now, San Diegans marched through Balboa Park over the weekend to raise awareness about human trafficking. Organizers say the FBI has identified San Diego as a high-intensity area for sex trafficking. One victim says she's learned a woman will be trafficked for sex every 30 seconds.
When you live in silence, you think it only happened to you. I thought it only happened to me. But by breaking my silence, sharing my story, I realized that I'm not the only one.
Junior League of San Diego organized the rally and march to raise awareness. They say human trafficking is one of the fastest growing crimes in the country. Published reports tonight say California Attorney General Kamala Harris will announce a run for Senate tomorrow to replace Barbara Boxer. Now, you'll recall last week Boxer said she would not run for re-election in 2016. The reports about the announcement quote a Harris aide. And California's lieutenant governor says he won't be running for Boxer's seat next year. Gavin Newsom says it's better to be candid than coy and says he still has work to do right here in California. San Diego Councilman Todd Gloria is proposing changes to the referendum process. Amitha Sharma looks at the potential impact.
Referendums, allowing the public to weigh in at the ballot box on issues that affect them, used to be viewed as the ultimate in democracy. But some believe the process has been distorted in the city of San Diego and used as a tool to circumvent the democratic process. San Diego State political science professor Brian Adams joins me now. Professor Adams, since last year, business groups have gathered enough signatures to block 3 city council decisions: an update on the Barrio Logan's community plan, an affordable housing linkage fee, and an increase to the city's minimum wage. Is that what the referendum was designed to do?
Well, initially, 100 or so years ago, the idea behind the initiative and the referendum was to give citizens a voice. At the time, the state government was overrun by interest groups, especially the Southern Pacific Railroad, and the idea was that if the government did things that were catering to interest groups and not to the public can step up, qualify an initiative, and overturn laws that they do. Nowadays, in order to get a referendum on the ballot, it takes a large amount of money. So most of the organizations that push these are very well-funded groups, like the San Diego Chamber of Commerce and other groups that are that aren't happy with decisions the City Council makes.
So then, would you say has it morphed into something else?
Yes, so clearly, I mean, if you look at both statewide as well as locally, the initiative process is generally used by well-funded groups that don't get their way in the legislative process. That wasn't the intent, but generally that's the way it's worked out.
So San Diego City Councilman Todd Gloria wants to make it harder to put referendums on the ballot. What are the options available to him to do that?
Well, to qualify a referendum for the ballot, you've got to collect a number of signatures based a certain percentage of the registered voters in the city. You have a certain amount of time to do that. Generally, these signature gatherers are paid. They're very, very hard to do with volunteers. So generally, an organization that wants to qualify a referendum, they collect a large number of signatures. And if you want to make that harder, you simply increase the number of signatures that are required.
So that's exactly what Councilman Gloria wants to do. He wants to increase the percentage of the required signatures for a referendum. How effective would that be?
Well, it would require that organizations that want a referendum spend more money on it, right? So instead of spending, a certain $10,000, they may have to spend $20,000 or $50,000 or whatever. The problem with that is that organizations that aren't very well funded, they now get priced out of doing referenda. Right now, generally, most referendum, the three that you mentioned, and most ballot initiatives are generally sponsored by well-funded groups. So generally, it's not going to be that effective because groups that have a lot of money will simply spend more, and the groups that don't have a lot of money generally don't fund these very well and very often anyway.
Councilman Gloria also wants to limit funding for signature gathering efforts at the state level. Does that run into potential constitutional problems?
Yes. So the U.S. Supreme Court has said that spending money on initiative and referenda is a form of free speech, right? If I sponsoring a referenda and I'm paying signature gatherers, the act of me paying those signature gatherers is a form of speech. And therefore, government can't limit that unless they have a very compelling reason to do so, to protect the integrity of the process, to limit corruption, and so on and so forth. So generally, the U.S. Supreme Court has struck down regulations that have tried to limit the paid signature gatherers. So, for example, in Colorado, they tried to ban paid signature gatherers completely and have all volunteers. The U.S. Supreme Court said you can't do that. There have been a number of other more recent cases that have also said that, struck down government regulations of the signature gathering process. So it's very, very hard for government to try to limit the money that is spent on signature gatherers.
Professor Adams, thanks so much for coming on the program.
Oh.
A record number of students applied to attend UC San Diego next fall. More than 94,000 applications for incoming freshmen and for transfer students. The university's totals were the third highest behind UCLA and UC Berkeley. UC San Diego says nationally the campus is ranked in the top 5 for applications over the past decade. Governor Jerry Brown wants to cap out-of-state enrollment at UC schools. It's a condition for the extra money put into the budget. Out-of-state students generate hundreds of millions for the university system each year, but some Californians say they're being displaced by those students. Millions of Americans have grown up with a Catholic education, but parochial schools are facing a crisis. Declining enrollment and school closures have become the norm. KPBS editor Tom Fudge reports on the problem here in San Diego and how the system is trying to change.
This is what my animals looks like. This first grade classroom is part of Blessed Sacrament School just off of El Cajon Boulevard in San Diego. The kids are prepared for their presentations, they're well behaved, and class size is small. Just what any parent would want, right? But the problem is the classes are actually too small. In the early 90s, Blessed Sacrament had 450 students in their K-8 school, but now there are only 130. An enrollment of at least 200 tuition-paying kids is the benchmark for keeping a Catholic school in the black. But new principal Ann Egan, who was brought in to turn the school around, says she's looking at the bright side.
I don't have a concern that Blessed Sacrament will have to close. With the number of students in our enrollment now, we're only going up. So I'm confident that we've got a community and a parish and a diocese that is committed to helping us thrive and succeed into the future.
Her optimism is welcome, but the fact remains the old business model of Catholic schools no longer works. Catholics today have smaller families, so there are fewer students. Until recently, religious orders provided a resident supply of nuns to teach the kids. Now schools have to hire lay teachers, causing labor costs to spike and tuition to go up. Then there is the organization of Catholic education itself, in which each parish is basically a different school district and its priest the superintendent. Scott Himmelstein with the Center for Education Policy and Law uses San Diego's 43 Catholic schools as an example.
So you've got 43 separate school systems, so to speak, each with their own tuition, each with their own curriculums, and in a sense they are competing against each other for students.
Himmelstein's group, based at the University of San Diego, did a study that was commissioned by the late San Diego Bishop Cirilo Flores. Flores was bishop for only a year before dying of cancer. Among the study's recommendations, create a foundation to financially support the schools, reorganize schools so the diocese becomes more like a school district, providing support with training, purchasing, and marketing. Damian Esparza, the Director of Development for the San Diego Diocese, says schools need the backing not just of one local parish, but of all San Diego Catholics.
Whether us as Catholics that sit in the pews or whether it's our parishes, that we are all responsible for Catholic education. No matter whether you have a parish or whether you have a school at your parish, or whether you don't.
Throughout their history, Catholic schools have served America's immigrants, the Irish, the Polish, the Italians, and they've served the poor. Today's immigrant population, the Latinos, make up 46% of San Diego school-age kids. Like the Irish, they're predominantly Catholic, but much more than the Irish, they find the cost of a Catholic education prohibitive. Angie Nieves has struggled to keep her children in Catholic school. Now she sends 3 of her 6 kids, including her daughter Victoria, to St. Patrick's School in North Park. She says Catholic school is a place where her children get an important spiritual message and where she believes they are safe.
This is actually like a safe haven for my family. That's the way I see it.
For Nieves, the cost of tuition has been a hardship, and she told this to the principal of St. Jude's Academy, the school her kids were attending a few years ago.
We're losing our house. My husband is also disabled, and there's so much going on. I was the only working parent, so I did not have the money. And she kept putting numbers in front of me to see what I could afford, and I kept having to say no. So at some point, she just says, you know what, don't worry about it. We're going to take care of you.
Her story of a generous principal had a sad ending for the school. St. Jude's was forced to close in 2011. The Nieves family still enjoys a tuition break at St. Patrick's, but collection of less than full tuition adds to the financial problems of any school. Full tuition at Catholic K-8 schools is typically between $4,000 and $5,000 a year. Making Catholic education available to people who are not well off is a challenge for which the San Diego Diocese has no easy answer. Remaking Catholic education is a work in progress. Damian Esparza says the vision of a faith-centric, financially sustainable education that does not exclude the poor remains the goal.
I think the vision of Bishop Flores is that any child that would like to attend Catholic schools can have that opportunity to attend a Catholic schools. Are we there right now? No, we're not. But is that the direction that we're looking to go? Yes.
The diocese has taken some small steps. They've created a scholarship fund for students in need in the name of Bishop Flores. Blessed Sacrament has joined a partnership of other Catholic schools to combine resources and buy materials. But times are hard and money is tight. Last year, salaries for all teachers at Blessed Sacrament reverted to entry level. That meant a pay cut for senior teachers of up to 30%. Tom Fudge, KPBS News.
Video journalist Nick McVicker helped produce that story. We have a link to the study on San Diego's Catholic schools on our website, kpbs.org.
I'm Judy Woodruff. On the next News Hour, we talk with the new heads of the federal agencies devoted to the arts and the humanities about their continued relevancy. That's Monday on the PBS News Hour.
Encinitas opened its new community park over the weekend after 25 years of work to get it built.
1, 2, 3.
There's a 13,000 square foot skate park, walking trails, and fields for soccer, baseball, and rugby. There's also a dog park. It cost about $40 million to build, including the cost of litigation by nearby neighbors. The new park opens 7 days a week. We're getting a few days to dry out from that bit of rain over the weekend. Temperatures will get warmer over the next few days, mid-60s tomorrow along the coast. For the inland valleys, upper 60s, low 70s. Cool in the mountains, low to mid-50s there, and for the desert, low 70s for the next few days. You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks for joining us. Have a great night.